Ethan Carter grabbed the lieutenant by the collar and slammed him against the wall of Hangar 6 hard enough that the man's coffee exploded across the concrete. "You have 40 minutes," Ethan said. "Then 1,100 people on this base start dying." The lieutenant laughed in his face. Everyone laughed. The single dad from logistics. The guy who left work at 1600 sharp to pick up his kid. The joke of Naval Station Belhurst. What none of them knew, what 4 people alive on this earth knew, was that the man they were laughing at had a service record so classified the Pentagon had sealed it under a name that wasn't even his. And in 40 minutes, they were going to find out why. Comment the city you're watching from right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe the strongest men are the quietest ones, subscribe. This one's for you. Met. 11 hours earlier, Ethan Carter was on his knees in a kitchen in base housing hunting for a missing shoe. Dad, we're gonna be late." "I'm aware, sweetheart." "Mrs. Delgado said if I'm late one more time, she's calling you." "Mrs. Delgado has my number. Mrs. Delgado and I have an understanding." He came up with the shoe. Purple glitter, one lace chewed halfway through by a dog they didn't own anymore. "Found it. Under the trash can. Explain that to me." Maya Carter, age 9, took the shoe without breaking eye contact. "I can't explain everything." "Try." "Nope." He almost smiled. She had her mother's way of ending a conversation, not rude, just done like the subject had been tried and convicted, and there was no appeal. 3 years since Sarah died, and the resemblance still landed on him at odd hours at the kitchen table in the rearview mirror. "Backpack," he said. "Got it." "Water bottle." "Got it." "Lunch." She stopped, turned around, went back for the lunch. In the car, she asked him the same question she'd been asking for 2 weeks, and she asked it the same way, casual eyes out the window, like she didn't care about the answer. "Are you coming Friday?" "To what?" "Dad?" "I'm kidding. The showcase. The one where you're playing the..." "I'm not playing anything. I'm doing the reading. I'm doing the whole..." She stopped herself. "You said you'd come." "I'll be there. Last year you said..." "I know what I said last year." He kept his eyes on the road. "Last year was a bad year. This year I'll be in the second row. Aisle seat. So I can embarrass you." "Don't sit in the aisle." "Third row then." "Sit in the back." "Absolutely not." She fought a smile and lost. He dropped her at the gate of the elementary school, watched her run the last 20 yards with the backpack bouncing, and felt the thing he always felt, that low, warm, unglamorous ache that had replaced everything else in his life and that he would not trade for any metal ever forged. Then he drove to work, where he was nobody. Naval Station Belhurst was not a glamorous posting. It was a supply hub, fuel, munitions, spare parts, the boring circulatory system that kept the glamorous postings alive. 1,100 personnel, 40 civilians. A commissary, a chapel, 3 warehouses, a fuel farm, and a special warfare detachment that had been rotated in 6 months ago and had spent every one of those 6 months making sure everybody knew they were there. Ethan's job was inventory reconciliation. He had a desk, a terminal, a clipboard, and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad," which Maya had bought him with her own money and which he was legally required to use every day. He'd been at that desk 18 months. In 18 months, he had raised his voice exactly 0 times. "Carter." Chief Bergstrom leaned in the door. "Hangar 6 manifest. They're screaming again." "Screaming about what?" "About how the numbers don't match, and it's your fault." "The numbers don't match because they signed for a pallet they never physically counted." "Tell it to them." "I did, twice." "Tell it to them a 3rd time. You're the one they like." That was Bergstrom's idea of a joke. Nobody liked Ethan. That wasn't quite right either. Nobody disliked him. He was furniture. He was the guy who fixed your paperwork and never asked for credit. and because he never asked for credit, nobody ever thought to give him any. He walked over to Hangar 6 with the clipboard. The Special Warfare guys had claimed the North Bay like it was sovereign territory. Their gear was staged in neat rows, their music was on, and Petty Officer Second Class Dylan Voss was holding court in the middle of it, because Voss was always holding court. "Gentlemen," Voss announced, "logistics has arrived. Everyone put away your weapons. He might get scared." Two guys laughed. One didn't, a young kid, maybe 20, sitting on a crate with a rifle across his knees. "Voss," Ethan said. "Pallet 4471, your signature." So it's signed for, and it's not here. Then it's somewhere else. That's what I'm asking. Where's somewhere else? Voss spread his hands. "Buddy, do I look like a guy who counts boxes?" "You look like a guy who signed for boxes." Something flickered across Voss's face. He was 28'6'2", and had the specific arrogance of a man who had been the best athlete in every room he'd ever walked into and had never once been humbled by anything. He came off the crate and walked over and stood a foot closer than he needed to. "You know what your problem is, Carter?" "Enlighten me. You take this seriously." Voss tapped the clipboard. "This, paper. You do this like it matters. And I get it, man. I do. You gotta tell yourself something. You gotta get up in the morning and go, the boxes need me." He grinned around the bay. "But nobody's gonna write a book about the guy who counted the boxes. Nobody's gonna write a book about you either." The bay went quiet for half a second. Then Voss laughed loud, generous, diffusing. "See, that's good. That's got some fight in it. There's a man in there somewhere." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder hard enough to move him. "Go home to your kid, Carter. Seriously, that's not an insult. That's the best job on this base and you got it." Ethan took the clipboard back and wrote something on it. "What did you write?" "That you refused to account for Pallet 4471. You did not. Have a good afternoon." He was almost to the door when the young kid, the one who hadn't laughed, caught up with him. "Sir, Carter, hey." "Not sir." "Right. Sorry." The kid was breathing a little fast. Nameplate said, Rivera. "Pallet 4471. I think I know where it went." Ethan stopped walking. "There was a truck," Rivera said. "Tuesday, like 0400. Contractor truck, fuel farm markings. Two guys loaded 3 pallets and drove out the east gate." 3. "You report it to." Rivera glanced back at the bay. "I told Voss. And he said contractors move stuff at weird hours all the time and I should stop volunteering for things." Rivera swallowed. "But the thing is, the fuel farm doesn't have a truck like that. I looked. I went and looked." Ethan stood there in the doorway with the clipboard in his hand and felt something turn over in his chest that hadn't turned over in 3 years. "Rivera," he said quietly. "What's your first name?" "Anthony." "Anthony, listen to me very carefully. Don't tell anybody else what you just told me. Not your chief, not your buddies, nobody. Not for 24 hours. Rivera's eyes moved over Ethan's face, the calm in it, the specific flatness of it, and something in the kid's posture changed. He didn't know why. He just responded to it the way you respond to a dog going still. "Okay," he said. "Why?" "Because if you're right, somebody on this base helped them get through the east gate, and I don't know who yet." Ethan went back to his desk and did not do his job. He pulled 6 months of gate logs. He pulled fuel farm maintenance requests. He pulled the contractor badge registry, the one nobody ever audited, because auditing it was 9 hours of misery, and no one had ever found anything. He found something in 40 minutes. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the screen for a long time, and his hands were perfectly steady, and that was the part that scared him. Because he knew what steady hands meant. Steady hands meant the other man was awake, the one he'd buried, the one he'd promised Sarah in a hospital room with the machines going that he would keep buried. Promise me he stays gone, Ethan. He's gone. Say it like you mean it. He's gone, Sarah. I swear to God. He picked up the phone and called operations. Lieutenant Commander Hale's office. This is Carter Logistics. I need 10 minutes with the commander today. Regarding a security matter. A pause. Paper sounds. Is this about the pallet thing? It's about 1,100 people. Longer pause. Sir, I have him at 1,500. He's got 15 minutes before the readiness brief. I'll take 5. Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hale was 41 years old and had a photograph of himself with a 2-star general on his wall positioned so that anyone sitting in the guest chair would have to look at it. Carter. He didn't stand up. You've got until my coffee's cold. Ethan laid 3 printouts on the desk. Between March and now, a contractor badge registered to a company called Meridian Fuel Services has cleared the East Gate at least 14 times outside of scheduled windows, always between 0300 and 0500. Always the same 2-man crew. Contractors work weird hours. Meridian Fuel Services doesn't exist. Hale's eyes came up. It's registered as a vendor, Ethan said. It has a badge in the system, an insurance certificate, and a point of contact. What it doesn't have is a business license in this state, a tax record, or a physical address that isn't a mailbox in a strip mall 2 hours from here. It was created in the system in February, sponsored internally. Sponsored by who? That's what I want to find out. The sponsoring account is a supervisor-level login in facilities. I don't have the authority to pull the audit trail on it. You do. Hale sat back, looked at the papers, did not touch them. Carter, do you know what happens when I chase this? You find out who made a fake vendor. No, what happens is I open a formal inquiry against a supervisor in facilities based on a logistics clerk's hunch, and NCIS comes down here for 6 weeks, and my readiness numbers go in the toilet, and I explain to the Commodore why my base is a circus. He tapped the desk. And then it turns out Meridian is some subcontractor's subcontractor with sloppy paperwork, which is what it always is. 14 unscheduled entries. At a fuel hub, you know how many trucks? They took 3 pallets out on Tuesday, Ethan said. Special warfare munitions, off the books. That landed. Ethan watched it land. Hale's jaw moved. Says who? Says an eyewitness. Name. No. Excuse me. I'm not giving you his name until I know who's dirty, sir. Because if I give you the name and it goes to the wrong desk, that kid is going to have an accident on a fuel line. Hale stared at him. And then he laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. That was the worst part. It was almost affectionate, the laugh of a man watching a child explain a monster in the closet. An accident on a fuel line. He shook his head. Carter, listen to yourself. You've been reading something, or watching something. What is it, one of those shows? Sir. No, I get it. I do. You sit in that office all day with the spreadsheets and it's quiet in there and the mind wanders. And you've got the kid and you're by yourself with her. And I know I know that can't be easy. He said it kindly. That was the knife. He said it kindly. I've got 2 of my own, and I've got a wife, and I'm still losing my mind. So you're wound tight. That's human. This isn't about my daughter. It's a little about your daughter. Hale slid the printouts back across the desk. You want everything to be a threat because you've got one thing left in the world you can't afford to lose. I've seen it before. Guys come back from something, and every shadow's got a guy in it. It's not weakness, Carter. It's just not evidence. Ethan looked at the papers on the desk. His hands stayed at his sides. Sir, he said, ask me how I knew about the badge registry. What? Nobody audits the contractor badge registry. It takes 9 hours, and there's never anything in it. So ask me how a logistics clerk knew to look there. Hale's coffee sat between them going cold, and for 1 second, one real second, something crossed the commander's face. A flicker of weight. Then the door opened, and Hale's phone rang, and the moment died the way moments do. "I have a brief," Hale said, standing. "Bring me a name and a document, and I'll take it to the Commodore myself. Bring me a feeling, and I can't help you." He picked Maya up at 1600. He always picked her up at 1600. "You're weird," she announced from the back seat. "I'm always weird." "You're quiet weird. That's different." She kicked the back of his seat. "Did somebody be mean to you?" "No." "You're lying." "I'm not lying, I'm editing." "That's lying with extra steps." Sarah again, right there in the mirror. He had to look away from it. "Somebody at work didn't listen to me about something important," he said. "That's all. So make them listen." "It's not that simple, kid." "Why not?" She said it the way 9-year-olds say things like it was obvious, like the whole complicated architecture of rank and reputation and 18 months of being furniture was just a bad excuse. "You're always telling me if something's not safe, I have to say it loud even if it's embarrassing. You say it like 100 times a week." Ethan didn't answer. "So say it loud," Maya said, and went back to her tablet. At 2100, he sat at the kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking, and a laptop that was 3 years old, and he looked at a folder he hadn't opened since the funeral. Inside was a phone number. Not in his contacts. Written by hand on a card, because the man it belonged to did not permit himself to exist in anyone's contacts. He'd promised Sarah he'd never call it. He looked at it for 11 minutes. Down the hall, Maya's light was off. The dishwasher ran. Somewhere on base, a truck downshifted, and the whole ordinary world went on being ordinary. And he thought about 1,100 people, and he thought about a 9-year-old girl who wanted him in the second row on Friday, and he understood with the terrible clarity that had made him very good at a job he no longer had that those two things were about to be the same problem. He dialed. 2 rings. Nothing on the other end, no hello, just a channel opening. Ethan said, "It's me." A long, long silence. Then a voice like a door being dragged over gravel. "No, it isn't." "Ray." "That number's a deadline. That number belongs to a dead man. So either I'm talking to a ghost or somebody's found something they shouldn't have." A pause. "Which is it?" "It's a ghost." The exhale on the other end went on for about 4 seconds. "Jesus Christ," Ray said softly. "Jesus Christ, 8 years. 9. Ray's voice changed, got quieter, got real. "I heard about Sarah. I wanted to come. I didn't think I had the right." "You had the right." "I didn't have the right." Silence. Then, "Why are you calling me Ethan? You don't call me. That was the whole deal. You go be a person and I stay in the hole and neither of us ever—" He stopped. "Oh. Yeah. Oh no. Ray." "No, no, no, no!" A chair moved somewhere. "You hear me? Whatever it is, whatever you're looking at right now on your little screen, you put it down and you go to bed and you wake up and you take your kid to school." 14 unlogged entries at a fuel hub. Fake vendor sponsored by an internal supervisor account. 3 pallets of special warfare munitions out the east gate at 0400 on Tuesday, no manifest. Dead air. "Ray, I'm here. Say something." "I'm doing math," Ray said. "Hang on, I'm doing math and I don't like the answer." "Neither do I." "Fuel hub, munitions staging, special warfare DEET rotating through—" A long breath. What's your population? 1,100, plus dependents in base housing. How far's housing from the fuel farm? 900 meters. That's not far enough. No, Ethan said. It isn't. Who'd you tell? Operations. He told me I was a nervous dad. Ray made a sound that wasn't a laugh. Course he did. You know why? 'Cause you did too good a job, brother. You went and became nobody, and it worked. It worked perfect. 9 years nobody looked twice at you. And now the one time you need somebody to look, I know. You're the guy who counts boxes. I know, Ray. You want me to make a call? Ray said. Because I can make a call. I make one call, and by 0600 there's people on that base who'll listen to you real careful. But Ethan, you understand what that call is. You understand what gets unsealed. Your name goes back in a system, and once it's in a system, it's in a system forever. Every door you shut it opens, every promise you made in that hospital room. I know what it costs. Do you? Ray's voice cracked just slightly. Because I remember your face at that funeral, and I remember you telling me you were done. And I believed you, man. That's the only reason I let you go. Ethan looked down the hall at the closed door with the crooked construction paper star on it. I need till Friday, he said. What's Friday? She's got a thing at school. She's been asking me for 2 weeks. She's asked me every day. Because last year I said I'd come and I didn't, and she's too polite to say that out loud, so she just asks again. Every day. Ray didn't say anything. So I need till Friday, Ethan said. I'll work it clean. I'll get the name, I'll get the document, I'll hand it to Hale on a plate, and he'll take it to the Commodore. And it'll be their win, and nobody ever has to know who I am. Then I go sit in the second row. He closed his eyes. That's the whole plan, Ray. That's all of it. Silence. Ethan, Ray said, and his voice had gone very gentle, which was somehow worse than anything else. 14 entries since March. 3 pallets Tuesday. You know what that pattern is. You taught that pattern. Don't. They're not building towards something. They're done building. Guys don't take the last load and then wait a month. Don't. Brother, a breath. It's not Friday. The refrigerator hummed. The dishwasher clicked over into its dry cycle. Then when? Ethan said. You tell me. You're the one who's still got eyes on it. Ethan opened the laptop again. Pulled the gate log. Looked at the entries, 14 of them March to now, and the intervals, and the way the intervals had been getting shorter, and the way there'd been nothing at all since Tuesday. Nothing since Tuesday. 4 days of nothing after 5 months of every 10 days. Bang. He had seen that shape before. He had seen it in a valley in a country he was not allowed to name. 16 hours before it happened, and he had told a captain, and the captain had told him he was tired, and 9 men had come home in boxes. Ray, he said. I have to go. Ethan. I have to go right now. Ethan, listen to me. Make the call, Ethan said. Make it tonight. It won't land by morning. These things don't move that fast. You know that. Make it anyway. He was already standing, already had his boots, already had the keys off the hook, and his hands were steady. God help him, his hands were perfectly steady. Ethan, Ray's voice caught him at the door. If you're right, and it's tonight or tomorrow, you can't do this as Carter from Logistics. Nobody's going to follow Carter from Logistics. Ethan stood in his own doorway, with his daughter asleep 40 feet behind him, and the whole engineered quiet of 9 years balanced on the end of a sentence. I know, he said. And he hung up. At 700 the next morning, he did not go to his desk. He went to Hangar 6, and he put a folder on a crate in front of Petty Officer Voss, and he said, "Read it." Voss looked at the folder, looked at the men around him. 8 of them coffee in hand, half-dressed for a PT session. "What is it?" "It's a list of every time somebody drove a truck that doesn't exist through your east gate." "My east gate." "Your debt, your munitions, your gate. Read it." Voss didn't read it. He picked it up, weighed it, and grinned. "You went to Hale." "I did. And Hale said no." He tossed the folder back on the crate. "So now you're coming to me. The guy you told wouldn't get a book written about him." "Yes." "Say please." "Please." The bay went quiet. Because Voss had been joking. Voss was always joking, and Carter had just set it flat. No bite, no pride, nothing. And something about that landed wrong in a room full of men who understood exactly how much a man has to have riding on a thing before he'll say please to somebody who's been kicking him for 18 months. Voss stopped grinning. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay. Talk." Someone inside this base created a fake contractor. That contractor has been through the East Gate 14 times since March, always at 0400, never logged against a work order. Tuesday, they took 3 pallets. 2 of them were yours. One of them was... Ethan tapped the folder. Page 4. Voss opened it to page 4. Ethan watched the color go out of his face. "That's no. No, that's a typo." "It's not a typo. That's an inventory typo. That's a..." Voss looked up. "Carter, do you understand what this says?" "Yes." "Then why the hell are you telling me? Why aren't you?" "Because I went to Hale. And Hale told me I was a nervous single dad who watches too much TV." Ethan said. "And because you're the only unit on this base that can actually do something in the next 4 hours. And because whatever you think of me, and you've made that pretty clear, you are, as far as I can tell, not a coward." And somebody in the back of the bay said, "Damn." Voss stood there holding page 4. 40 minutes, Ethan said. "That's what I'd give it. They've gone quiet for 4 days after 5 months of clockwork. That's not them stopping. That's them staging." "You'd give it." Voss's voice was strange. "You'd give it. Carter, how the hell would you know what 40 minutes looks like?" Ethan Carter, logistics specialist, single father, world's okayest dad, looked at him, and for 1 second, just one something came up behind his eyes that had no business being in a supply clerk. Something that had been sitting in the dark for 9 years, patient as a stone waiting to be asked. "Because I've been on the other side of it," he said. Nobody laughed. And 41 minutes later, the fuel farm went up. At 0741, the sound arrived before the shockwave did a low thud that came up through the concrete of Hangar 6 and into the bones of every man standing in it. And then the shockwave itself, and then the windows on the north side of the bay, let go all at once. Nobody moved. 8 special warfare operators, some of the most expensively trained men in the United States military, stood perfectly still with coffee in their hands and glass in their hair. Ethan Carter was already on the floor with Rivera pinned under him. "Down," he said. "All of you, down." 3 of them dropped. Voss didn't. Voss was still standing there holding page 4, looking at the doorway where the sky had turned the wrong color. "Voss, down." "That's the fuel farm." "I know what it is. Get on the floor." "That's 900 meters from housing. Voss." And something in Ethan's voice did what 6 months of a chief's yelling had never done. Voss went down. 2 seconds later, the second pressure wave came through and took the rest of the glass and a section of roof panel with it, and it went over their heads instead of through them. In the ringing after Rivera said into the concrete, "Sir, you're on my arm." "Sorry." "It's okay." "It's not okay. I broke your watch." Sir, that's fine. That's really fine." Ethan got up on a knee. 12 seconds had passed since the first thud. He had already counted them. "Listen to me," he said. and he did not raise his voice, and that was somehow why every man in that hangar heard him. The first one was the pump house. The second one was a tank. That means there's at least 4 more tanks, and none of them have gone yet. How do you know it was the pump house? How do you know? Because it was small and it was first. You don't blow the tanks to start. You blow the pump house so the fire suppression has no pressure, and then you let the tanks cook. Voss was on his feet. Then we've got what minutes? Minutes. Minutes till what? Till it stops being an accident and starts being a funeral. At 07:42, the base alarm finally went off, and it ran for 6 seconds, and then it stopped. Nobody said anything for a second. Why'd it stop? Rivera said. Because somebody stopped it, Ethan said. At 07:43, Voss got on the radio and said, Ops Bravo 2. Actual, we have a detonation at the fuel farm. Request instructions over. And the radio said nothing. He said it again. The radio said nothing. He looked at the handset like it had personally lied to him. Ops is 2 miles from the blast, one of the guys said. They're fine. They gotta be fine. They're fine, Ethan said. They're just not talking. What's that mean? It means somebody's sitting on the net. Carter, that's insane. Is it? Ethan looked at him. The alarm ran 6 seconds. Alarms don't run 6 seconds. Alarms run until a human being physically overrides them, and the override is in the ops building, and the ops building is fine. He let that sit exactly 1 beat. Do the math out loud. I want you to hear yourself do it. Nobody did the math out loud. Okay, Voss said. His voice had changed. It had gone flat and fast and about 10 years older. Okay, boys gear up. Full kit. Full kit, we don't have an order. I am the order. Move. At 07:45, Ethan walked out the hangar door and looked east, and everything he had spent 9 years burying stood up inside him and stretched. The fuel farm was a column. That was the honest word for it. It went up and flattened out at the top, and the whole eastern sky was the color of a wound. And 900 meters south of it, close enough that the housing units were catching the light on their windows, were 406 dependents, and one of them was named Maya Carter. And she was at school. She was at school. She was at school. It was 7:45, and school started at 8 o'clock, and the bus went at 7:15. And she was at school. And Ethan stood there for exactly 2 seconds and let himself have that, and then he put it away. Rivera came up beside him. Sir, my mom lives in Bakersfield. What? I don't know why I said that. Rivera's hands were shaking. I don't know why that's the thing in my head. It's a fine thing to have in your head. Is it gonna spread to housing? Not if the wind holds. Is the wind gonna hold? Ethan looked at the column at the way the top of it was leaning at the flag on the pole outside the chapel. No, he said. At 7:47, Voss came out with his kit on and his rifle up, and 8 men behind him, and he stopped in front of Ethan and said the last thing anyone in that hangar expected. What do we do? Somebody actually made a noise. One of the operators, a big kid named Doheny, said, Voss, what are you? Shut up. Voss didn't look away from Ethan. Carter, you said 40 minutes. It was 41. So I'm going to ask you one time, and I want a straight answer, and I don't care how crazy it sounds. What do we do? And Ethan Carter, who had not given an order in 9 years, felt the shape of it come back into his mouth like a language he'd dreamed in. First thing he said, you stop calling this an attack on the fuel farm. It is an attack on the fuel farm. No. The fuel farm is the noise. Nobody spends 5 months building an infiltration route to burn diesel. He pointed north away from the fire at a low gray building nobody ever looked at. That's the noise. Everything you're feeling right now, every instinct in your body screaming, go east. That's what they bought with 3 pallets. They bought your attention. Doheny said, so what's the target? I don't know yet. You don't know. I know what it isn't. That's how this works, son. You clear the board and what's left is the answer. Ethan turned. Voss, how many of your guys can you put on the fire? We're not firefighters. You are today. The fire department has no pump pressure. They're going to figure that out in about 90 seconds, and then they're going to start pulling people out of the maintenance shops by hand. There are 11 civilians in those shops on a Friday morning. They need bodies. That's half my team. Yes. For a distraction. The distraction is going to kill 11 people whether it's a distraction or not, Ethan said. That's what makes it a good one. Voss stood there. Ethan watched him do it. Watched a 28-year-old who'd never lost anything hold the whole ugly arithmetic of it in his hands for the first time in his life. Doheny, Voss said. Take 4. Get to the shops. Voss. Take 4 and get to the shops. At 7:51, the second tank went, and the sound of it rolled over the base like God clearing his throat, and somewhere behind them, a car alarm started and would not stop. At 7:52, Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and something went through him that he would not be able to describe later. Not to anybody. Not ever. That's your kid, Voss said. Yes. Carter. Ethan answered it. Daddy. Hey, baby. There's a fire. Her voice was doing the thing it did when she was trying very hard to sound calm, and it was coming out too high. There's a really big fire, and Mrs. Delgado made everybody go to the gym, and she took our tablets, and she never takes our tablets, and I took mine anyway. I'm in the bathroom. Don't be mad. I'm not mad. Emma's crying. Emma's crying really loud. Is Mrs. Delgado there? She's in the gym. She's doing the thing where she smiles too much. Okay? Ethan closed his eyes. Maya, listen to me. Are you listening? Yes. You're doing great. I'm not. You are. You called me and you told me exactly what's happening in about 11 seconds, and that's better than 90% of the grown-ups on this base right now. He heard her breathe. Here's what I need. I need you to go back in the gym, and I need you to sit next to Emma and hold her hand. But that's the job. That's the whole job. You sit next to Emma and you hold her hand, and you don't let go until somebody with a badge tells you to. Long pause. Are you coming? The fuel farm burned 900 meters away, and 800 people were about to find out what 4 days of silence had been for. And Ethan Carter stood in a parking lot with a phone against his ear. Yes, he said. Promise. I promise. You promised about the second row, and I'm going to be in the second row. His voice did not shake. He made sure of that. Tonight, 7 o'clock, second row aisle seat, embarrassing you. That's a fact. That's already happened. You just haven't gotten there yet. She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. Go hold Emma's hand, he said. Okay. Maya. What? I love you more than anything that has ever existed. You always say that. Because it's always true. He hung up. Voss was looking at the ground. Say it, Ethan said. I wasn't going to say anything. Say it. I was going to say, Voss's jaw worked. I was going to say I've been calling you a single dad for 6 months like it was an insult. It's not an insult. Yeah, Voss said. I'm getting that. At 07:54, the 4 men still with them heard Ethan Carter start talking, and their lives changed. Voss, your det has how many long guns in the armory? 40-something. How many are signed out? Right now, 9. Ours. Who has the key to the armory cage? Duty armorer. Chief Landry. Where's Landry? He'd be at the armory. It's 7:54 on a duty day, he's at the armory. Call him. Voss called him. The radio said nothing. He called again. Nothing. Landry's got a handheld on him at all times, Voss said slowly. It's the whole job. He doesn't go to the bathroom without it. Right. Right what? Right, that's the target. At 07:55, the four operators looked at each other and Rivera said out loud, "Oh my God." 31 rifles, Ethan said, plus sidearms, plus whatever's in the ready lockers. That's what you buy with a fuel farm. Every armed man on this base runs east toward the fire. The armory sits alone for 11 minutes, and you walk out with enough to arm a company. To do what? Doesn't matter. It matters, Carter. It matters to a Senate committee in a year and a half, Ethan said. It doesn't matter to us in the next 11 minutes. At 7:56, Voss made the first genuinely good decision of his career. He said, "Everybody on me." And then he turned to Ethan and said, "And everybody on him." And one of his guys said, "Voss, he's a clerk." And Voss said, "He called it to the minute." You want to argue with the man who called it to the minute. Then run east with everybody else and be wrong with the majority. Nobody ran east. At 7:57 they moved, and the moment they started moving, Ethan Carter stopped being furniture.
Bolo saw it.
It happened in front of them, and they could not have said exactly when. He didn't shout, he didn't posture, he just started saying things 2 seconds before they were needed, and the things kept being right. Rivera off the road, ditch line. Why? Because the road's the only place they can see you from the water tower. Ditch line. There's a guy on the water tower. There's a guy on the water tower. You can see him. No. Then how do you? Because I'd put a guy on the water tower, Ethan said, and Rivera got in the ditch. At 07:59, Doheny's voice came over the team net from the maintenance shops, and it was wrong. It was the voice of a very large young man discovering something. Bravo 2, this is Doheny. We're at the shops. We've got Voss. We've got 11 civilians. They're all accounted for. They're all fine. A pause. They're all fine. There's nobody hurt. Not one. Voss keyed the radio. Say again. There's nobody hurt, man. The blast was on the far side of the berm. Whoever said it, they said it so the shops wouldn't take it. The four men in the ditch line looked at Ethan. Yeah, he said quietly. That's Carter, that's good, right? That's good news. That's the worst news you've had all morning. How is nobody dying the worst? Because it means they're not animals, Ethan said. It means they measured the standoff and shaped the charge and made sure the American civilians in the shops would live. Which means they are patient and disciplined, and they are executing a plan they have rehearsed, and they are not going to make the mistakes you are counting on them making. Nobody said anything for a second. And, Ethan said, it means at least one of them has walked that berm with a tape measure. On foot. On this base. In daylight, recently. At 08:01, Rivera said, "Sir, the fake contractor, Meridian. You said somebody inside sponsored the badge." Yes. Did you ever find out who? No. So there's somebody. There's somebody, Ethan said. And he's going to be standing somewhere very reasonable doing something very normal, and everyone is going to be glad he's there. And at 08:03, they hit the north access lane and Ethan put a hand up and every one of them stopped without deciding to. 2 vehicles, he said. Armory loading dock. White box truck, blue sedan. I don't see a sedan. It's behind the truck. You can see the shadow under it. Voss went down on a knee and looked and said quietly, "Son of a bitch." How many men? Carter, I can't even see the... Guess. I don't guess. Then you'll die uninformed. Guess. Voss looked, really looked. Truck's a 15-footer. If they're loading it fast, they need 4 inside minimum. 2 on the dock. 1 driver. 1 somewhere I can't see. That's 8. That's what I said. That's exactly right, Ethan said. And you did it in 9 seconds, and I want you to remember that you could do that because in about 4 minutes, you're going to have to do it again with people shooting at you. At 08:04, Voss keyed his radio and said, Any station. This is Bravo 2 Actual. We have armed personnel at the main armory loading dock requesting immediate. And the radio said nothing, and he tried a different channel, and the radio said nothing, and he tried the guard channel, and a voice came back. A calm voice. A pleasant voice. Bravo 2, this is base security. Say your location. Every man in the ditch relaxed an inch. Ethan put his hand over the radio. Voss looked at him. Ethan shook his head once. Bravo 2. The radio said warmly, patiently. This is base security. We copy armed personnel at the armory. Say your location and we'll link up. Voss's thumb hovered over the key. Carter, he whispered. That's Chief Reyes. I've known Reyes for 6 months. That's Reyes. Yes. So the base alarm ran 6 seconds, Ethan said. So the net's been dead for 22 minutes, and it just now came alive the second you keyed it near the armory. So he asked for your location twice, and he didn't ask you a single question about the fire. Voss's face did something terrible. Give me the handset, Ethan said. What are you? Give me the handset. Voss gave him the handset. At 08:05, Ethan keyed it and said in a voice that was not his own, that was flatter and older and wrong. Security Bravo 2, we're at the fuel farm berm west side. Fire's got the second tank. We need bodies. Pause. Copy Bravo 2, west berm. Stand by, we're pushing units to you. Ethan handed the radio back. Voss said. You just sent security to the wrong side of the base. I sent the people who are pretending to be security to the wrong side of the base, Ethan said. The real ones are already there. They don't need help finding a fire. And if you're wrong, then I've delayed the response to a fire that already can't be put out. Ethan looked at him. You want the arithmetic, Voss? That's the arithmetic. That's what it's like. You want to know why I got out. Voss didn't answer. At 08:06, the box truck's rear door came down with a bang they could hear from 200 meters, and a man in a base facility's polo shirt walked around the side of it, and Rivera made a small sound. That's Mr. Kessler, Rivera said. Who? Facilities supervisor. He does the badge stuff. He did my badge. He's got pictures of his grandkids on his desk. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Carter. Yeah. Is that the guy? Is that your guy? Yeah, Ethan said. That's my guy. At 8:07, everything went fast. The truck started. The sedan started. And Ethan Carter said 4 sentences that 8 men would repeat for the rest of their lives. Voss, you and Rivera take the ditch to the transformer pad. You'll have an angle on the driver's door at 30 meters and nothing behind him but a berm. Cortez, you're staying here, and you are not shooting anybody. You are going to lie in this ditch and count every single man who comes out of that truck, and you are going to say the number out loud on the net every time it changes. Nobody fires until the truck is stopped, because the second you put a round in that cab, you have a 15-foot vehicle with no driver doing 40 miles an hour toward a road that goes exactly one place. Where's it go? The elementary school, Ethan said. Everything on this base goes past the elementary school. Silence in the ditch. And you, Voss said. I'm going to go stand in front of it. You're going to what? At 08:08, Ethan Carter stood up out of the ditch and walked into the middle of the north access lane in a logistics uniform with a clipboard still in his left hand because he'd never put it down, because in 9 years he had never once put it down, and he raised his right hand like a man stopping traffic. Carter. The truck was doing maybe 20. It came around the turn and the driver saw him and the truck did not slow. Carter, move. He didn't move. At 0809, the truck was 40 meters out, and Voss was screaming into the radio, and Rivera had his rifle up, and his whole body was one long shake, and Ethan Carter stood in the road with his hand up like a school crossing guard, and he was not afraid. And that was the thing that Rivera would remember when he was 60 years old and telling this to somebody's kids. That the man was not afraid. That the man looked bored. 20 meters. Ethan's hand went down, bow, and the truck's front left tire came apart. Nobody heard a shot. There wasn't one. There was just the tire, and then the truck was sideways, and then it was in the drainage culvert on the north side of the lane, at an angle that meant it was never coming out, and the cab door was jammed against 40 degrees of dirt, and the sedan behind it locked up its brakes and slewed and stopped. Voss got to him 9 seconds later. "What did you do?" "Culvert grate," Ethan said. 20 meters back. It's been broken since March. I put in 4 work orders. I flipped it up on the way past. It's a piece of steel, and it's sitting in the road at an angle. That's all it is. He was already moving toward the truck. Cortez count, now. 4-4 out the back. No 5-5-5-1's got a... At 0810, the first shots of the day were fired on Naval Station Bellhurst, and they went over Ethan's head by about 2 feet, and he did not flinch, and he kept walking. "Get down." Voss had him by the shoulder. "Carter, get down." "They're shooting high." "They're shooting at us." "They're shooting high." Ethan pulled free. "Look at the dirt. Look where the dirt's coming up. That's suppression. They don't want a firefight. They want 90 seconds to clear the truck and get in that sedan." He pointed. "Rivera, the sedan, engine block, right now." Rivera fired twice. The sedan died. And in the sudden quiet afterward, a voice came across the lane, and it was tired, and it was American, and it was Mr. Kessler from Facilities, who had pictures of his grandkids on his desk. "Ethan." Every man in that lane froze. "Ethan Carter." Kessler's voice again from behind the truck. Conversational. "That's you out there, isn't it? Logistics." Voss looked at Ethan. Ethan said nothing. "I know it's you," Kessler called, "because I read your work orders, 4 of them, about a culvert grate." A pause. "I'm the guy who didn't fix it." At 0811, Voss whispered, "He knows you." "He knows the clerk." "What's the difference?" Ethan didn't answer. "Ethan." Kessler called, "I want to say something to you man to man. You want to hear it." "Don't answer him," Voss said. "He's timing you. He's using your voice to place you. I know what he's doing." Ethan cupped his hands. "Say it, Bill." "You're the only one who ever noticed." Nobody in the ditch breathed. 5 months, Kessler called. 5 months, 14 trips, and in 5 months, the only human being on this installation who ever asked me a single question about it was a supply clerk with a purple lunchbox in his passenger seat. He laughed. It was a real laugh. It sounded like a guy at a barbecue. "You know what that says about this place? Say what you want to say." I did say it. That's what I'm saying. Nobody noticed. Nobody's ever noticed. 31 years, Ethan. 31 years I signed for their badges and I fixed their air conditioning, and not one of those officers ever learned my first name. Pause. "You know my first name." "Bill, you know my first name." And for the first time, something cracked in it. "Because you're the only one who ever looked at me, and I'm going to have to shoot you, and that's the whole rotten joke of it, isn't it?" At 8:12, Ethan Carter said the thing that ended it. How much did they pay you? Silence. Bill, how much? That's not. Because they didn't, Ethan said. That's what I think. I think you told yourself there was money coming, and you're going to find out in about 4 minutes that there isn't. Because the sedan's dead, and you've got 5 men, and the men in that truck aren't Americans, and the only person in this whole operation who was ever going to be left standing in a lane with a Navy team pointing rifles at him is you. You're the cutout, Bill. You've been the cutout since February. Nothing. Who's on the water tower? Ethan said. Nothing. Bill, who's on the water tower? And Kessler said very quietly, There's nobody on the water tower. You're lying. No. A breath audible across 200 meters of open ground. No, son. That's the first true thing I've said since February. There's nobody on the water tower. Longer pause. There's somebody in ops. At 0813, Voss said, What? There's somebody in ops, Kessler called. Where'd you think the radio silence was coming from the tower? He laughed again, and this time it was awful. You think I'm the guy. I'm the guy who does badges, Ethan. I'm the guy who does badges and doesn't fix culverts. The truck's not the mission. The truck was never the mission. Then what's the mission? You already know, Kessler said. You've known since you saw the intervals. You just don't want it to be true because of where it puts your kid. At 8:14, Ethan Carter went absolutely, completely still. And Voss, watching him, saw the exact moment the man he'd been mocking for 6 months disappeared, and something else stood up in his place. Something that had been waiting 9 years in a room with the lights off, patient as a stone. Rivera, Ethan said. What's the one thing on this base that never moves and always has 100 kids in it and sits directly between the fuel farm and the main gate? Rivera's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Say it, Ethan said. The school, Rivera said. Say it again. The school. It's the school. Oh God, it's the... They're not stealing rifles to sell, Ethan said, and he was already turning, already moving, and his voice was the calmest thing in that lane, and it was the most frightening sound any of them had ever heard. They're stealing rifles that trace to this base. American rifles. Serial numbers that come back to a U.S. Navy armory. And then they're going to use them 900 meters from here on a building full of American children, and every camera in this country is going to point at a school, and every serial number is going to point at us. So Voss said, Carter. 1,100 personnel on this base, Ethan said, and every single one of them is standing east watching a fire. At 08:15, Voss keyed his radio and said, Doheny, drop everything and get to the school. And the radio said nothing, and he said it again, and the radio said nothing. Carter, the net's dead again. I know. Carter, the net's dead, nobody's coming. Nobody even knows. I know. Then what do we do? And Ethan Carter, single father, logistics specialist, world's okayest dad, looked at 4 young men in a ditch line and gave them the only order that mattered. We run. At 08:15 and 40 seconds, they came out of the ditch line at a dead sprint. 4 operators in full kit, and 1 man in a logistics uniform with no rifle, no vest, and no plan except a number in his head that kept getting smaller. Voss caught him at the fence line. Carter, stop. Kessler's still back there. We're leaving 5 armed men behind us. Yes. That's 5 guys who can shoot us in the back. They won't. How do you know? Because they're not going to the school, Ethan said. The truck was the delivery. Their job was to hand the rifles off and disappear. Kessler's already thinking about a lawyer. And if you're wrong, then we die tired. He didn't slow down. Cortez, you're the fastest. Yes, sir? Don't call me sir. Go to ops. Cortez actually stumbled. You just said somebody's in ops. That's why you're going. By myself. You're not going in. You're going to the antenna farm behind it. There's a gray junction box on the north wall, waist height padlocked. The padlock's been cut since at least this morning. Somebody opened that box and pulled a jumper, and that's why nobody can hear us. Rivera. Running, gasping. How do you know that? Because it's the only way to kill a base net without killing the phones, and the phones are working. Kessler talked to somebody 20 minutes ago. Cortez was already peeling off. What do I do when I get there? Put the jumper back. I don't know what a jumper looks like. It's the one thing in the box that isn't attached to anything, Ethan called after him. And Cortez, whoever cut that padlock is going to come back and check it, so when you're done, don't stand next to the box. At 0817, Rivera said between breaths, Sir, 900 meters. We're not going to make it in under 4 minutes with Kit. 350. What? 3 minutes 50. And it's not 900 meters. It's 640 if you go through the chapel lot and over the fence behind the dumpsters. There's no gap in that fence. There's a gap in that fence, Ethan said. My daughter made it. Voss made a sound that was almost a laugh and had nothing funny in it. At 0818, the base net came back on for exactly 9 seconds. It came alive in Voss's ear with a crackle and the sudden roar of 40 people all talking at once, fire chief screaming for pressure, somebody calling for a corpsman, a duty officer demanding to know who had authorized what, and Voss keyed his mic and yelled, all stations, armed personnel, moving on the elementary school. This is not a drill, all stations. And for one beautiful second, the whole net went silent. Then it went dead again. Bow. Voss stared at the handset. No. He found Cortez, Rivera said. Or he just pulled it again, Ethan said. Either way, somebody heard you. Somebody on that net heard you, and they're moving right now. That's 9 seconds we didn't have 30 seconds ago. 9 seconds isn't a response, Carter. It's a rumor, Ethan said. Rumors move faster than orders. Run. At 0819, the fourth man, a wiry kid named Pratt, who hadn't said a word since the hangar, finally spoke. Mr. Carter, do you have a weapon? No. You want mine? No. Why not? Because you're going to need it, and I'm not going to be shooting anybody, Ethan said. I'm going to be talking. Pratt looked at Voss. Voss shook his head, meaning, don't ask, meaning I've stopped asking. At 8:20, they came through the chapel lot, and Ethan put a hand out, and every one of them went to a knee behind the parked cars without being told, and the thing he'd been afraid of the whole way was standing in the school's front turnaround. A white van. Doors open. Nobody in it. They're already inside, Rivera whispered. How long? Carter, I don't. Hood, Ethan said. Pratt, touch the hood. Pratt crawled forward and put his palm on it and crawled back. Warm, not hot. How warm? Like coffee warm. Under 3 minutes. Ethan's jaw moved once. They beat us by 90 seconds. At 0821, Voss said the thing out loud that all 4 of them had been carrying since the ditch. Carter, your kid's in there. Yes. So you gotta tell me right now. Voss's voice was tight. You gotta tell me right now if you're gonna be a father or an operator, because I can work with either one, but I can't work with a guy who's switching. Ethan looked at him for 2 full seconds. That's the smartest thing you've said in 6 months, he said. Answer the question. I'm going to be a father, Ethan said. That's the whole reason I'm good at this. Every one of those kids in there belongs to somebody who's standing east right now watching a fire and doesn't know. Every single one. So don't ask me to stop being a father, Voss. That's the only weapon I brought. Yo. At 0822, Rivera started to cry silently and kept his rifle up while he did it, and nobody said anything about it because there was nothing to say. At 0823, Ethan started giving orders, and the last piece of Carter from logistics fell off him and hit the ground. 4 entrances. Front gym, cafeteria, loading, kindergarten wing. The kindergarten wing door's been broken for a year. It doesn't latch you, push it, and it opens. That's where I'd go in, and that's where they went in, because Kessler works facilities, and Kessler knows every broken door on this base. He knows them better than the base commander knows his own name. So we go in the kindergarten wing. No. They'll have a man on it. Then how? Voss. How many men in the van? I don't know, it's a van. Guess. Voss looked at it. Made himself look. Seats are out. Cargo mats are down. If they had 8, some of 'em rode on the floor. Say 6. 6, Ethan said. 2 to move the rifles. 2 to hold a room. 1 on the door. 1 on the phone with whoever's in ops. And they went in 90 seconds ago, and there's been no shooting. Yes. Why is there no shooting?
데모히.
And that was the moment. Ethan felt it arrive, felt the whole shape of it click into place the way it always used to 3 seconds before anybody else, and it was worse than he had let himself imagine. Because they don't want to shoot, he said. Yet. What? Voss, listen to me. If you want a massacre, you start at the door. You come through the front and you start at the office and you don't stop. 90 seconds is a lot of bodies. There are no bodies. He was already moving. They're staging. They want the kids alive and in one room and on camera. Because a dead school is a tragedy and a hostage school is a broadcast, and every rifle in there has a serial number that comes back to a U.S. Navy armory 900 meters away. Rivera said, "That's not an attack. That's a movie," Ethan said. "They're making a movie, and they need about 40 minutes of runtime, and that's the only reason any of those children are still breathing." At 0824, Voss said, 40 minutes, and something in his face went very cold and very grown up. Okay. So we have time. No, we have 40 minutes before it's scripted. We have maybe 6 before somebody in there gets nervous. At 8:25, Ethan walked out from behind the cars in a logistics uniform with a clipboard in his left hand and started across the turnaround toward the front doors of Wilson Elementary School. Voss nearly gave himself a heart attack. "Carter." He didn't stop. "Carter, what are you doing?" "Working." "They will kill you." "They won't," Ethan said, not turning around, walking at exactly the pace of a man who has somewhere to be, but isn't late. "Because I'm not a threat. I'm a fat, middle-aged clerk with a clipboard and a broken watch and no vest, and there's a fire on the east side, and I'm exactly the thing they've been rehearsing for. I'm the guy who wanders in. Every plan has a guy who wanders in. And what happens to the guy who wanders in? Depends on the plan," Ethan said. "Get to the gym roof. There's a hatch. It's not locked. Ask me how I know." "How do you know?" "I fixed it," Ethan said. "Twice. Nobody signed the work order." At 0826, he pulled the front door of the school open and walked in, and the man standing behind it put a rifle against his chest. Ethan looked at the rifle, then at the man. Then he sighed the enormous put-upon sigh of a government employee at the end of a long week. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. The man said nothing. "Is this about the fire?" Ethan held up the clipboard. "Because I've got a evac accountability sheet, and I have to physically lay eyes on 140 kids, and if you're about to tell me this hallway's closed, I want you to know I've been doing this since 0600, and I have not had coffee." The rifle didn't move, but the man's eyes did. They went down to the clipboard and back up, and Ethan saw the exact half-second of "This is the guy who wanders in, this is the contingency. I have a contingency for this." "Turn around," the man said. Slight accent. Not much. Careful English. "Buddy, I can't." "Turn around." "I can't," Ethan said, and let his voice go up. Let it get whiny. Let it get exactly as pathetic as it needed to be. "If I turn around, I go back to Chief Bergstrom without a count, and Bergstrom writes me up, and that's my 3rd one this quarter, and I've got a kid, and I cannot lose this billet. Do you understand? I have got a kid." And that was the first lie, and it was true, and that was the trick of it. The man's rifle came down 2 inches. "Down the hall," he said. "Slow. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Ethan started walking. You wouldn't believe the morning I'm having. At 8:27, Voss, flat on the gym roof, whispered into a dead radio, he's in, to nobody at all. At 8:28, Ethan Carter walked into the gymnasium of Wilson Elementary School with a clipboard and counted in 3 seconds everything. 141 children sitting on the floor in rows. 6 teachers. Mrs. Delgado standing at the front with her arms out like she could physically cover 30 kids at once. 4 men. 2 at the doors. 1 at the far end with a phone. 1 in the middle of the floor with a rifle at low ready. And a canvas duffel at his feet that was open, and inside the duffel were the rifles. The American rifles, the ones with the serial numbers laid out in a neat row like tools. And in the 4th row, from the front, 3rd from the left, a 9-year-old girl in a purple shoe holding another little girl's hand and not letting go. Ethan did not look at her. That was the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, and there was competition. Okay, he said loudly to the room holding up the clipboard. Who's in charge? I need a signature. The man in the middle of the floor turned around. Ethan knew him. Not personally. He knew the type, knew it in his spine, knew it from a valley he wasn't allowed to name. Mid-40s, calm hands, no excitement anywhere in him. The kind of man who had been doing this so long he had stopped enjoying it, which made him the most dangerous thing in the building. Who are you? The man said. Not a question. Carter, logistics. Evac accountability. He waved the clipboard. Fire on the east side. I've got to physically count heads and get a signature from the ranking adult, and then I'm gone. There is no fire. There's absolutely a fire I can show you from the parking lot. There is no fire here. Well, Ethan said, no. That's kind of the point of an evacuation. Somebody in the 3rd row giggled. A kid. One single kid out of pure, terrified, nervous overflow. And it was the most dangerous sound in the world, and it also cracked the room open half an inch, because 6 teachers heard a man in a Navy uniform make a joke, and something in all of them stood up. The man in the middle looked at Ethan for a long time. Put the clipboard on the floor, he said. Sure. Slide it. Ethan slid it. It stopped at the man's boot. He picked it up, looked at it. It was in fact an evacuation accountability sheet, because Ethan Carter had spent 18 months being furniture, and furniture always has the right paperwork. Something in the man's face changed. Not fear. Something worse. Recognition of a different kind. You are the clerk, he said. I'm the clerk. You are the clerk who filed the work orders. The gym went very quiet. Excuse me, Ethan said. 4 work orders, a culvert grate. The man came 2 steps closer. The kindergarten door, the roof hatch, the lock on the antenna box. You are the man who tried to fix everything and no one signed anything, and we walked in on the back of that. Ethan said nothing. Do you know, the man said, almost kindly, how long I have been on this base? No, 5 months. And in 5 months, 1 American noticed us. He tapped the clipboard against his own chest. 1. And he had no rank, and nobody listened to him. Do you know what that told me about your country? You want to know what it told me? Ethan said. Tell me. It told me that I'd get 1 shot at this, Ethan said, and that when it came, nobody would be behind me. And then he smiled. At 8:30, the man on the phone at the far end of the gym said something in a language none of the children understood, and hung up and said in English, 12 minutes. He says 12 minutes, and then we begin. Who says? Ethan asked. Nobody answered. Who's he? Ethan said. Because there's a guy in my ops building sitting on the radio net, and I'd love a name. I'm a clerk. I love a name. Names go in boxes. The man in the middle of the floor almost smiled. You will find out, he said in 12 minutes. At 8:31, the thing happened that Ethan had been counting on and dreading in equal measure. Maya Carter stood up. Not all the way. Just up onto her knees in the fourth row, because a 9-year-old had just heard a voice she had heard every morning of her life saying, "I'm the clerk to a man with a gun," and every instinct she had was screaming, "Daddy." Ethan did not look at her. He talked instead, fast, loud, and stupid. "Okay, so here's my problem," he said, walking 3 steps to the left, dragging every eye in the room with him, away from row 4. "My problem is Bergstrom. You don't know Bergstrom. Bergstrom is a man who has never in his life accepted an incomplete count. I could tell him this building was on fire actively with him inside it, and he would ask me for the sheet." "Sit down," the man said. "I'm standing because if I sit, I'm going to be here all day, and I—" "Sit down." Joe. And Mrs. Delgado. God bless her. Mrs. Delgado, who had taught 9-year-olds for 26 years and had a sixth sense for a child about to do something catastrophic, put her hand very gently on Maya's shoulder and pressed down. Maya sat. Ethan sat. And in sitting, he ended up on the floor 11 feet from the duffel bag, which was exactly where he had been trying to get since 0826. At 0833, Voss lay on the gym roof with his ear against the hatch and heard faintly the sound of Carter from logistics complaining about a chief named Bergstrom, and understood all at once what he was actually listening to. "He's not stalling," Voss whispered. "He's narrating." "What?" Pratt breathed. "He's telling us where everybody is." Because it was in the complaining. "2 of you by the doors, and 1 of you on the phone way at the other end, and 1 of you standing over a bag in the middle of my gym." It was in there buried in a whine about paperwork, and Voss had been listening to that man's voice for 6 months and had never once heard what was under it until right now. "Pratt," Voss said, "count the doors again." At 0834, the man with the phone said, "10 minutes." And the man in the middle of the floor knelt down and started taking the American rifles out of the duffel and laying them on the floor of the gymnasium in front of 141 children, and Mrs. Delgado said, "Please, please don't do that in front of them." He kept doing it. "They're 9, she said. "Yes," he said. And Ethan Carter, sitting on the floor of the gym, said very quietly, "Hey, look at me." The man looked up. "You've got a kid," Ethan said. "You know nothing about me. You've got a kid. I've watched you for 2 minutes, and you've adjusted your sleeve 4 times, and you keep checking a watch that's on the wrong wrist, because you're used to a wedding ring you took off." Ethan didn't blink. "So somewhere there's a woman, and there's at least 1 kid, and they think you're somewhere else right now." The gym was absolutely silent. "Do not," the man said, "talk about my family." "I'm not. I'm talking about mine." Ethan tapped his own chest. "Because in 9 minutes, you're going to point a camera at 140 American children with American rifles on the floor, and you're going to be very famous. And here's the part you haven't thought about. Your kid's going to see it." "Nothing. Not now, in 12 years. Some kid at school's going to pull it up on a phone and hand it to him and say, 'Hey, isn't that your dad?'" Ethan said. "That's what you're building. That's the actual product, not the politics, not whoever's paying. Just a video of you forever and a boy who has to watch it." The man's hands had stopped moving on the rifle. At 0836 he said thickly, "You are very good at this." "I'm a clerk." "No," the man said. "You are not." At 0837, everything came apart at once. The base net came back on, not for 9 seconds, for good. It came roaring back, and every handheld radio in the building screamed at the same time, including the one on the hip of the man by the west door, and it said in a voice Voss recognized instantly, "All stations be advised we have armed personnel at Wilson Elementary, all available units." Cortez had gotten to the box. The man by the west door grabbed his radio, and the man in the middle of the floor came up off his knee, and Ethan Carter was already moving. And he had been moving actually since 0834 in inches in the tiny amounts a man can move while he is complaining about paperwork. And he was now 9 feet from the duffel instead of 11. "He's inside," Voss said on the roof. "Pratt, they know. Go." At 8:38, the roof hatch came off the gymnasium ceiling, and the two men on the doors both looked up, which was the single mistake they made all morning, and it was the only one they needed to make. Ethan Carter crossed 9 feet of gymnasium floor in less time than it takes to say it. He did not go for a rifle. That was the thing nobody who told the story afterward could ever quite believe. He went for the duffel, and he got it by the bottom, and he stood up and turned in one motion and threw 110 pounds of canvas and steel across the floor toward the stage, away from the children, and 31 American rifles went sliding out across the varnish in every direction. And the man in the middle of the floor put his own rifle in Ethan's face. 12 inches. Less. Everything stopped. 141 children, 6 teachers, 2 operators half out of a ceiling hatch, and 1 man in a logistics uniform standing in the exact center of the room with a barrel touching his forehead and his hands open at his sides. "Move," the man said, "and I will kill you." "I know," Ethan said. "Get on the floor." "No." "Get on the floor." "No," Ethan said. "Because if I get on the floor, you'll shoot me on the floor, and every kid in this room will watch a man in a Navy uniform get shot on the floor, and they will have that for the rest of their lives." His voice was perfectly steady. "So I'm going to stand up, and you're going to have to do it standing up looking at my face, and you're going to have to live with that instead." At 8:39, Maya Carter screamed, "That's my dad!" It tore out of her, all of it, and it went through that gymnasium like a round. And Ethan closed his eyes. The man's rifle did not move, but his eyes did. They went involuntarily 1 inch toward row 4. And Ethan said very quietly, "Don't." The man's eyes came back. "Don't," Ethan said again. "Whatever you are, whatever you came here to be, not that. You don't get to look at her. You brought her into this. She was born into this. She goes to school here. That's the whole crime. That's the entire thing she did." Ethan's voice cracked for the first time all morning, and he let it. "Her mother died 3 years ago in a hospital in Norfolk, and I promised her I would never be this man again, and I have kept that promise every single day, and you have made me break it in a gym in front of her, and I want you to understand that I am not angry about the rifles. I'm not, and none of them were dead, and none of them were getting up." And one man was still standing in the middle of the gym with a rifle against his forehead. "Carter," Voss said. His own weapon was up. "I don't have it. I don't have the angle. There's kids behind him." "I know." "Carter." "Stand down, Voss." "Carter." "Stand down." At 0841, the man with the rifle in Ethan Carter's face said, "You have no weapon." "No." "Why?" "Because I knew if I brought one, I'd use it," Ethan said. "And there are 141 kids in this room, and there is no shot in here that's worth taking. Not one. Not by me, not by him. And you know that. You've known that since you walked in. That's why you're still holding a rifle instead of firing it, because you know exactly how this room adds up. You've done the arithmetic. So have I. It's the same number." The man said nothing. 12 minutes, Ethan said. "That's what your friend said at 0830. That's 11 minutes ago. Where is he?" "Nothing." "Where's your 12 minutes, brother? Where's the guy in ops? Because the net's back up. And the net coming back up means somebody put a jumper in a box, and that means the guy who cut that padlock either left or lost, and either way." Ethan's voice dropped. "Nobody's coming for you. He's gone. You're the one standing in a room full of American children with 100 witnesses and 31 rifles on the floor and every camera in the country about to point right here, and the person you were doing it for is on a road somewhere." At 8:42, the man's arms began very slightly to shake. "You want to know the worst part," Ethan said. "He's not even the top of it. He's a middle. There's always a middle. And in about 6 hours, some analyst is going to look at all this and figure out that the only guy who ever loved this plan enough to actually stand in the room was you. Stop talking. You're standing in a gym. Stop talking. You're 46 years old and you have a kid, and you're standing in an American gymnasium under a basketball hoop with a rifle pointed at a man who counts boxes, Ethan said. And if you pull that trigger, that's the last thing that ever happens to you. That's the whole life. That's all of it. Right here under the hoop. At 0843, the man's finger came off the trigger. Nobody breathed. Say it, Ethan said gently. Just say it out loud. Nobody in this room speaks your language. Say it to yourself. The man said something. 4 words. Quiet. Then he opened his hand, and the rifle dropped, and it hit the gymnasium floor with a clatter that 141 children would remember for 60 years. He went down on his knees. Voss, Ethan said, he's yours. Dear. At 0844, Voss had him on the floor and zip-tied, and it was over. It was actually physically over, and Wilson Elementary School exploded into sound. Every child in the room crying at once, teachers screaming. Mrs. Delgado on the floor with her arms around 6 kids, and out in the turnaround, the first security vehicle arrived, and then a second, and then 11 more, and men who had spent the entire morning running east came pouring through a door they'd been 90 seconds from being too late for. Ethan Carter stood in the middle of the gymnasium and did not move. Because he couldn't. Because a 9-year-old had come out of row 4 like a shot and hit him in the ribs hard enough to stagger him, and had both arms locked around his middle, and was not saying anything at all, was just holding on with her whole body, the way she had held on in a hospital hallway in Norfolk 3 years ago. He got down on his knees on the floor of the gym and put his face in her hair. You came, Maya said. I told you I'd come. You came. Second row, he said. Aisle seat, told you. She laughed, and it turned into something else halfway, and he held her, and around them 140 children were being carried out by men in body armor, and every single one of those men coming through that door saw the same thing. The clerk, from logistics, on his knees in the middle of it holding his kid. At 0847, Voss walked over and stood there and didn't know what to do with his hands. Carter. Yeah. Cortez is up. He's at ops. He says the box was open and the jumper was on the ground. Voss swallowed. He says he found a facilities badge next to it. Kessler's. No. Ethan looked up. It's not Kessler's, Voss said. It's a supervisor login, same one that sponsored Meridian. Cortez ran it. His voice had gone strange. Carter, the account's not facilities. It's facilities sponsored. It's an ops account with facilities permissions. There's like 4 people on this whole base who could set that up. And at 8:49 on a Friday morning on his knees on a gymnasium floor with his daughter's arms around his neck, Ethan Carter looked past Voss and out through the propped-open doors of Wilson Elementary School, where Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hale was standing in the turnaround in a clean uniform, unhurt, unsooted, 24 minutes from a fire he had never gone to, telling a security chief in a very calm voice that he had suspected something like this all along. Bet. At 0850, Ethan Carter did not stand up. That was the first thing Voss noticed, and it frightened him more than anything that had happened in the gym. The man had been on his feet through a rifle barrel and 31 loose weapons and a screaming child, and now with it over with his daughter's arms around his neck, he stayed on his knees. Carter. Give me 10 seconds. Carter, he's right there. I know where he is. Ethan's voice was muffled in Maya's hair. 10 seconds. Voss counted them. Actually counted them standing there in full kit with a rifle across his chest and a lieutenant commander 40 feet away giving a statement, and he counted to 10 because a clerk had asked him to. At 0851, Ethan let go of his daughter and held her at arm's length. Hey, look at me. I am. You did the job. I let go of Emma's hand, Maya said, and her chin went. When I stood up, I let go. Did you take it back? Yeah. Then you didn't let go, Ethan said. You put it down for a second and you picked it back up. That's not the same thing. That's not remotely the same thing. Do you hear me? She nodded. Mrs. Delgado, he called without turning. Ma'am. Mrs. Delgado came over. She was 58 years old, and she had been holding 6 children off the floor for 4 minutes, and her hands had not stopped shaking since 0838. Mr. Carter, she said, I need her to go with the other kids, front of the line, with Emma. Of course. And ma'am. He looked up at her. 20 minutes ago, you put your hand on her shoulder, and you sat her down. That's the only reason she's alive. Mrs. Delgado's face came apart, and she got it back together in about a second and a half, which was a discipline Ethan recognized, which was the exact discipline he'd seen in men with 20 years in. Come on, sweetheart, she said. Maya went 2 steps and turned around. Dad? Yeah. Is it still tonight? And Ethan Carter, who had just talked a man out of murdering him, discovered that his voice did not work. Yeah, he managed. It's still tonight. At 0853, he stood up, and Voss watched the last of the father go somewhere, and get put in a box, and something else came up in its place, and Voss took an involuntary step back. Where's Cortez? Ethan said. Ops? Get him off the base. What? Not off the base. Get him out of that building and get him somewhere with 4 other people in the room. And tell him not to be alone for the rest of the day. Ethan was already walking. He's the only person who has physically seen that junction box. He's a witness to a thing nobody else saw. Carter, wait. Voss got in front of him. Wait, you're telling me Hale? I'm not telling you anything. Carter. Voss. Ethan stopped. Ask me why the alarm ran 6 seconds. You already told me. Somebody overrode it. From where? From Ops. And who was in Ops at 0742 on a Friday? Voss's mouth opened. And who did I hand a folder to yesterday at 1500? Ethan said, with a fake vendor's badge number on page 1. And who told me to bring him a name, and who is standing 40 feet away in a uniform with no soot on it? 24 minutes into a fuel fire he never went to, saying he suspected something all along. At 0854, Voss said very quietly, I'm gonna be sick. Don't. He was my commander. He still is, Ethan said. That's the problem. At 0855, Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hale walked into the gymnasium of Wilson Elementary School with a security chief on one side of him and a lieutenant on the other, and he saw Ethan Carter, and he did the single most impressive thing Ethan had ever watched a human being do. He smiled, warmly, with relief, and he crossed the floor with his hand out. Carter. Ethan looked at the hand. Carter, my God. Hale's voice genuinely caught, and Ethan watched the muscles do it, and could not in his entire professional life remember seeing it done better. You tried to tell me. You sat in my office, and you tried to tell me, and I sent you out with a pat on the head. Yes, sir. I want that on the record. Hale turned to the security chief. Chief, I want that on the record right now. This man briefed me yesterday at 1500 hours, and I dismissed him. That's mine. That's going to follow me, and it should. The security chief was writing. And Ethan understood in that moment with a clarity that made his stomach turn over exactly how good this man was. Because it was perfect. It was the perfect play. Confess the small thing loudly, and nobody ever looks for the large thing. Be the officer who admit he was wrong out loud in front of witnesses at 0855. And for the rest of your career, you're the man with the humility to own it. And every investigator who ever comes near this file will start from the assumption that Bryce Hale's sin was arrogance. Ethan took his hand and shook it. Voss made a noise. "Sir," Ethan said. "Thank you." "No, don't thank me." Hale gripped harder. "Don't you ever thank me. What do you need right now? Anything." "I need Petty Officer Cortez off the ops watch floor." 2 seconds. A flicker. The smallest thing in the world, and if Ethan Carter had not spent 11 years of his life in rooms where the smallest thing was the only thing, he would have missed it. "Cortez," Hale said. "Is he hurt?" "No, sir. He's just a kid who ran 2 miles and I want eyes on him." "Done." "Chief, put somebody on that." Hale let go of his hand. "Carter, come to my office at 1100. Bring everything you've got. Every printout, every log, every note. I'm taking it to the Commodore myself, and you're going to be standing next to me when I do." "Yes, sir." 1100. 1100, sir." Hale walked out. Voss said through his teeth, "You just—" "Yes." "You just made a time and a place." "Yes," Ethan said. So did he. Yards. At 08:57, Rivera came over with his rifle slung and his hand still vibrating and said, "Sir, they're taking the 4 guys. Security's got them. They want to know who to write up as the responding element." "Voss," Ethan said. "What?" Bravo 2 responded to a report of armed personnel at the elementary school and cleared the building. That's the report. That's not the report, Carter. That's not Voss. Ethan looked at him. "If my name goes on that piece of paper, it goes into a system. And once it's in a system, somebody in an office somewhere is going to pull the thread. And in about 4 days, they're going to find out that Ethan Carter's service record has a gap in it. And then they're going to find out the gap has a lock on it. And then this stops being about a fuel farm and starts being about me. And the man who did this walks out the door while everybody's looking at my file." Rivera said, "Sir, there were 140 kids in there. They're going to ask who talked him down." "Bravo 2 talked him down." "That's a lie." "It's a report," Ethan said. "Son, listen to me. There's a difference between a lie and a document. The document is what an institution can use. You want the truth to survive. Then give the institution something it can process and put the truth somewhere it can't reach." At 08:59, Voss said, Okay, but I'm putting one thing in." "What?" "That Bravo 2 responded on information provided by a logistics specialist at 0745, Voss said. "Time-stamped, before the fire." Ethan stopped. "Because if I don't," Voss said, "then in 6 months, a board's going to ask how a special warfare det happened to be at the right building at the right minute, and the answer's going to be Luck and Carter. I will eat a rifle before I let Luck take credit for you." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "Put it in," he said. At 9:02, the phone in Ethan's pocket buzzed. Not a call, a text, from a number that did not exist. "Get off the base." He wrote back, "Can't. 3 seconds. I made the call last night. You know what that means." Ethan. "I made the call, and by 0500 there were people awake in Virginia, and by 0630 somebody had pulled a file that has not been touched in 9 years. And at 0700 that file got a hit from a query originating on your base." Ethan stood in the parking lot of an elementary school and felt the ground move. "Say it plainly, Ray. Somebody on Bellhurst ran your name this morning, your real one. At 0903, Ethan wrote timestamp 7:03. Which was 40 minutes before the fuel farm went up, which was 2 hours after Ethan had put a folder on Bryce Hale's desk with 14 gate entries on it and refused to give up a name. Ray, who has the authority to run that query from a base like this? Nobody. Ray. Yay. I mean nobody, Ethan. It's not a permission you can have. It's a permission you have to be given one time for one reason by somebody at a level that does not talk to lieutenant commanders. At 0904, Ethan Carter closed his eyes in the parking lot of his daughter's school and understood finally all of it, and it was so much worse than a stolen truck. So somebody gave it to him, he wrote. Somebody gave it to him. At 9:05, Voss found him standing perfectly still with a phone in his hand. Carter, what? He's not the top. What? Hale. Ethan said. He's not the top, he's a middle. I told the guy in the gym there's always a middle, and I was looking right at one, and I didn't see it. Carter, you're not making... At 07:03 this morning, somebody on this base ran a database query that a lieutenant commander is not physically able to authorize, Ethan said. Somebody handed him a key. Somebody 2,000 miles from here, who has never set foot on Belhurst, wanted to know who I was 40 minutes before the fire. Voss went white. They knew about you. They knew something. They knew about you, Carter, that's wait. Voss's brain caught up, and Ethan watched it happen. Wait. Wait. If they ran your name at 07:03 and the fire's at 07:41, then they didn't run my name because of the fire. Then why'd they run it? Because I put a folder on a desk at 1500 yesterday, Ethan said, and Bryce Hale looked at 14 gate entries and a fake vendor, and he did not think this clerk is paranoid. He thought, how the hell does a clerk know to audit a badge registry? At 09:06, Voss said, "Oh my God, you told him." I asked him. You asked him how you knew about the badge registry? Yes. Carter. That was you being clever. That was me being vain, Ethan said, and the flatness in his voice was the worst thing Voss had heard all day. That was 9 years of a man swallowing his own name, and I got one shot at getting somebody to listen, and I couldn't do it without telling him I was somebody. One sentence. That's all it took. So the fire. The fire happened at 07:41, because at 07:03 somebody in Virginia read a file and told Bryce Hale to move his timeline up. At 9:07, Rivera, who had been standing there listening with his mouth open, said, Sir, that means, say it. That means they went early. That means they weren't ready. Ethan looked at him. That's why nobody died at the shops, Rivera said, and his voice was shaking. That's why they didn't have the school locked down clean. That's why the guy said 12 minutes. They weren't supposed to be doing it today, sir. They ran because of you. Yes. So if you hadn't gone to Hale. Then it happens next week, Ethan said, with a full setup and no fuel farm to warn anybody and 141 kids and nobody in that gym but a man with a clipboard who wasn't there. Nobody said anything. That's the arithmetic, Ethan said. That's what it's always like. You never get to know if you saved it or caused it. You just get to know what happened. At 9:10, Ethan walked to his car and sat in it and did not start it. Back to. He looked at the passenger seat. There was a purple lunchbox on it. There had been a purple lunchbox on it every day for 18 months, and a man he'd never met had noticed it and had built a whole speech around it and had said it to him across 200 meters of open ground while pointing a rifle. He put both hands on the wheel. Then he took out his phone and did the thing he had promised his wife in a hospital room in Norfolk with the machines going that he would never do. He dialed. 2 rings. Don't, Ray said. I have to. Ethan, listen to me. Listen, you call that number, and there is no coming back. That's not drama. That's not me being poetic. That is the literal administrative fact. You call that number, and Ethan Carter of Logistics dies this morning, and a man I'm not allowed to say out loud gets born back into a system with a beating heart, and every single door you shut in that hospital room opens, and it opens on your daughter. They already opened it. They opened a door. They ran my name, Ray. They ran a name, one query. That's a crack in a window. What you're about to do is take the whole wall out. Ray's voice was raw. You go in that office at 1100 as a clerk, and Hale wins, and some analyst in a basement spends 4 years untangling it, and maybe they get him, and maybe they don't. But maybe you take your kid to a school thing tonight. You go in there as who you actually are, and you get him today. Today. Guaranteed. And then Maya Carter's father is a file with a lock on it forever, and she finds out what you are from a stranger. Ethan sat in his car with both hands on the wheel. How long, he said. How long what? If I call it. How long till it's real? Silence. Ray. About 90 minutes, Ray said. It's already staged. It's been staged since 0500. Because I made the call, and once you make a call, they build the thing whether you want it or not. There is a man in a car right now 40 minutes out from your gate holding an envelope, and the only reason he hasn't driven through it is that I told him to sit tight because my friend has a kid in a school event. He exhaled. Ethan, I have been sitting on that man for 4 hours. Why? Because I made a promise to your wife too, Ray said. At the funeral, in the parking lot. You didn't know that. At 0913, Ethan Carter put his forehead on the steering wheel. Ray. Yeah. There's 141 kids who went to school this morning. I know. And there's a man who's going to be a captain in 3 years, and then he's going to be somewhere that has more than 1,100 people in it. I know, brother. So there isn't a choice. There was never a choice. You knew that at 2100 last night. Long, long silence. Yeah, Ray said. I knew it at 2100 last night. Then send him. Ethan. Send him, Ethan said. And Ray, tell him not to come through the main gate. Tell him to come to the school lot and park where nobody can see the plates, because if Hale sees a government sedan he doesn't recognize before 1100, he runs and I lose him. At 0914, Ray said, You understand what you're doing? Yes. Say it. I'm putting him in the ground, Ethan said, and I'm going in with him. At 0916 he hung up and sat in the car for 4 minutes and did not cry, because the thing about the man he used to be was that the man he used to be didn't, and he was already back. He had been back since 0745, and there was nothing to be done about it now. Then he got out and went to work. At 0940, Ethan Carter walked into the logistics office, and Chief Bergstrom stood up so fast his chair went over. Carter. Chief. They're saying the school, they're saying you. Chief. I need 40 minutes, and I need you to lie to anybody who comes looking for me. Bergstrom stared at him. Can you do that? Who's coming looking for you? Ops. At 0941, Chief Bergstrom, who had spent 18 months making jokes about the quiet guy at the third desk, sat back down slowly. Carter, is this the badge thing? Ethan stopped. What? The badge thing. Meridian. Bergstrom rubbed his face. You asked me about it 3 weeks ago. You said, Hey Chief, you ever hear of Meridian Fuel Services? And I said no. And then I forgot about it because it's a Tuesday, and I've got 100 things, and it's a badge. He looked up and his eyes were red. Was that it? Was that the whole thing 3 weeks ago, and I just... Chief. Was it? It was 14 entries and a fake vendor, and there were 9 people who could have caught it, Ethan said. You were number 9. Number 1 was a lieutenant commander with the folder in his hands. Don't take his. Bergstrom stared at him. 40 minutes, Ethan said. You got it. At 0958, Ethan built a package, not the folder he'd given Hale, the other one. The one he'd built at 200 that morning with a laptop on a kitchen table and a beer he never drank, because a man who has been a certain kind of man for 11 years does not hand over his only copy of anything. Gate logs, badge registry, the vendor sponsorship trail, and then the 3 things he'd added at 0300 and hoped he'd never need. Hale's building access records for the last 5 months. Hale's personal vehicle at the East Gate at 0347 on a Tuesday in April. And a single line item from the base telephone system because nobody had killed the phones, because you can't run an operation without phones. And at 0704. On this Friday morning, a call had gone from Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hale's desk extension to a cell number with a Virginia area code, and it had lasted 91 seconds. 1 minute after somebody ran Ethan Carter's real name. He printed 3 copies. He put one in an envelope and wrote a name on it and walked it 4 buildings over and put it in the hands of a woman in legal who had never met him and who he had chosen for exactly that reason. He put the second copy in his car under the passenger seat next to a purple lunchbox. The third one he carried. At 10:42, he walked to the ops building 18 minutes early because the only thing better than being on time is being early enough to see who's in the parking lot. At 10:44, he saw the car. Not a government sedan. A gray 4-door with civilian plates and a man behind the wheel who was doing absolutely nothing, which was how Ethan knew. Ethan didn't look at him. At 10:46, he walked past the car and said without turning his head, "Not yet." The man didn't answer. At 10:50, Voss caught up with him at the ops building door. "Carter." "Go away." "No." "Voss, I'm walking in with you." "You are absolutely not walking in with me." "Why?" "Because you've got 4 years in and a career and a mother somewhere who'd like to see you have one," Ethan said. "And because if this goes the way I think it goes, in about 6 minutes, there is going to be a lieutenant commander in a room saying things that no enlisted man should have to hear and then testify about. Then I'll testify." "Voss." "He laughed at you," Voss said, and his voice broke on it, and he was 28 years old, and he had held a man's shoulder in a ditch that morning, and he had spent 6 months being the funniest guy in every room. In his office. He laughed at you and you had it. You had all of it, and you sat there and he laughed. So did you. Voss stopped. "Every day for 6 months, Ethan said. "In front of your guys, in the hangar, loudly." "Yeah." "You know what the difference is?" "No." "You laughed because you thought I was nothing," Ethan said. "He laughed because he knew I was right." At 1:05, too, Voss said, "I'm still coming in." And Ethan Carter looked at him, and something in his face moved just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." At 10:58, they walked into Lieutenant Commander Bryce Hale's office, and Hale was standing at the window with his back to the door, and there was a bag on the floor behind his desk, and Ethan saw it and did not react. "Carter." Hale turned, smiled. "And Voss. Good, I want him here." "Sir?" "Sit down, both of you." "I'll stand, sir." "Suit yourself." Hale sat. "Where are we?" Ethan put the folder on the desk. Hale looked at it, did not touch it. Same as yesterday. Exactly the same as yesterday, and Ethan felt 18 months of quiet stand up in him and get very, very still. "That's everything," Hale said. "That's everything I have." "Good man." Hale finally put his hand on it. "Because the Commodore's flying in at 1400, and he's going to want a name. And Carter, you were right about that from the jump. You said, 'Bring me a name.' I said, 'Bring me a name.' Well," he tapped the folder, "I've got one." At 1100, Ethan said, "Who?" "Bill Kessler." Voss's hand closed into a fist. "Facilities supervisor, 31 years. Access to everything, oversight from nobody, and a wife with $140,000 in medical debt." Hale opened the folder and began calmly to page through it. Security picked him up at 0820, sitting in a drainage culvert with his hands on his head. He's already talking. He's going to talk for a week. He sponsored the badge, he cut the padlock on the antenna box, he unlocked the kindergarten door. He looked up. "It's clean, Carter. It's the cleanest thing I've ever seen. It's finished." "Sir," Ethan said, "Bill Kessler can't run a database query on a sealed personnel file." The room went perfectly, absolutely silent. Hale's hand stopped on page 4. "I'm sorry," he said. "At 0703 this morning, somebody on this installation ran a name against a sealed federal file," Ethan said. "That's not a permission you have. That's not a permission you have, sir. That's a permission somebody has to hand you one time for one reason. And at 0704, your desk extension placed a 91-second call to a cell phone in Virginia." He didn't move. Page 6. Hale did not turn to page 6, And at 07:41, Ethan said the fuel farm went up, 37 minutes early, on a plan that had been running like a clock since February. Nobody breathed. You went early, Ethan said. That's what I can't get past, sir. You had 5 months of discipline and you threw it away in one morning, and I've been trying to figure out why since 0900, and I only just got it about 10 minutes ago. He tilted his head. You weren't scared of the operation getting caught. You were scared of me. Hale's face had not changed. That was the horrifying part. It had not moved a millimeter. Because I sat in that chair yesterday at 1500, Ethan said, and I asked you how a clerk knew to audit a badge registry, and you couldn't sleep. So at 700 this morning, you called the man who gave you your key, and you said there's a guy in logistics, and he ran the name, and 91 seconds later, you had an answer that was so much worse than a paranoid dad that you burned 5 months of work to get ahead of it. At 11:02, Bryce Hale said quietly, "What was the answer?" And Ethan Carter said, "You tell me. You're the one who got the phone call." Silence. Then Hale laughed, softly. Not the laugh from yesterday. A different one entirely, and Voss's blood went cold because it was a laugh of pure, unguarded professional admiration. They wouldn't tell me, Hale said. That's the thing, Carter. That's the funny thing. I asked him. I said, who is he? And he went quiet for about 4 seconds, and then he said, and I want to get this right. He said, move it up. Move it up today, and if that man is anywhere near it, walk away and leave the country. At 11:03, Voss said, you son of a... Voss. Ethan didn't look at him. Not yet. He knew, and he sent those guys into a school anyway. Not yet. At 11:04, Bryce Hale looked at Ethan Carter across a desk and asked the only question he actually cared about. Who are you? And Ethan Carter said, I'm the clerk. No, I'm the clerk, sir. I've been the clerk for 18 months. I fixed your roof hatch, and I filed 4 work orders on a culvert grate, and I brought you a folder at 1500 yesterday, and you told me I was a nervous dad. His voice was perfectly level. That's all I am. That's all I ever wanted to be. And the only reason you're going to prison is that you couldn't leave it alone. At 11:05, there was a knock at the door. Hale's head came up. Come, he said.
Vaite.
And a man in a gray suit opened the door, and he was holding an envelope, and he did not look at Bryce Hale at all. He looked at Ethan, and he said a name. Not Carter. Voss heard it. He would hear it for the rest of his life at 3 in the morning for 30 years. He heard a man in a gray suit say 2 words in a lieutenant commander's office on a Friday at 11:05, and he watched Bryce Hale's face finally move. Oh, Hale said. And he sat back in his chair very slowly, like a man setting down something he'd been carrying for a long way. Oh, he said again. Oh. At 11:06, the man in the gray suit said, Sir, I need you to confirm. And Ethan Carter, single father logistics specialist, world's okayest dad, stood in an office with a folder on the desk and a purple lunchbox in his car, and a 9-year-old girl in a gymnasium 4 buildings away, who was expecting him in the second row at 7 o'clock. He closed his eyes. Confirmed, he said. At 11:07, Bryce Hale said, Can I ask one thing? The man in the gray suit didn't answer him. Neither did Ethan. One thing, Hale said. Not for a lawyer, not for the record, just for me. He looked up. Was it the coffee? Ethan said. What? Yesterday. In here. You put 3 pages on my desk, and I told you my coffee was getting cold, and I never touched them. Hale's voice had gone strange and quiet. I've been doing this 5 months, Carter. 5 months, and I did everything right, and the one thing I did wrong was I didn't pick up 3 pieces of paper. If I'd read them in front of you, you'd have watched my face, and you'd have known, and you'd have gone somewhere else with it. He almost laughed. I didn't read them because I was being a jerk to a clerk. That's it. That's the whole thing. I lost because I was rude. No, Ethan said. No. You lost because you were rude for 5 months to everybody, Ethan said. You never learned Bill Kessler's first name. That's why he was for sale. You never learned Rivera's name either, and Rivera's the one who told me about the truck. You built the whole thing out of people you looked through, sir, and every single one of them is the reason it came apart. At 11:08, the man in the gray suit said, "Commander, stand up, please." At 11:09, Voss watched a lieutenant commander of the United States Navy get walked out of his own office, and he found he was not enjoying it at all, and he had expected to enjoy it very much. At 11:11, the office was empty except for 2 men and a folder. "Carter?" "Yeah." "He said your name." He said a name. "Carter." "Voss." Ethan turned around. "Here's what happens now. That name goes in a report that 4 people read. Then it goes in a vault, and in about 30 years, somebody writes a book with a lot of blank spaces in it." He picked up the folder. "You're going to be interviewed, probably 11 times, and every time you're going to say you don't remember what he said." "That's a lie." "That's a classification." "It's the same. It's not the same thing, and it will never be the same thing," Ethan said. "And you're going to learn the difference this week whether you want to or not." Voss stood there. "I have a question," he said. "Ask it." "Was it worth it?" At 11:12, Ethan Carter said, "Ask me at 7 o'clock." At 11:40, they put him in a room. Not a cell. A conference room in a building he'd walked past every day for 18 months with a table and 8 chairs and no window, and 4 people who had flown in from somewhere and were not wearing name tapes. The one in charge was a woman about 60, with reading glasses on a chain. "Sit down," she said. "Do you know why you're here?" "Because at 7:03 this morning somebody ran my file." "Yes." She opened a laptop. "Do you know who?" "No." "Would you like to?" At 11:41, Ethan said no. She looked up over the glasses. "Say that again." "I don't want to know," Ethan said. "Because if you tell me a name, then I have a name, and then I'm a man with a name in his head. And I've been that man. I know exactly what he does with it." He put his hands flat on the table. "I've got a 9-year-old. She's got a thing at 7 o'clock. I would like very much to walk in there tonight as her father, and not as a guy who's carrying a name." The room was quiet for about 4 seconds. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, "in 19 years I have never once had somebody in that chair turn down a name." "I know." "Why not?" "Because everybody in that chair thinks the name is the end," Ethan said. "It's not. The name is a door. And I shut that door in a hospital room in Norfolk 3 years ago, and I promised a dying woman I'd leave it shut, and I have broken every part of that promise today, except the last one, and I'd like to keep one piece of it. Just one. That's all I'm asking." At 11:43, the woman took her glasses off. "Do you understand what you did this morning?" "I flipped a culvert grate. You identified a 5-month infiltration operation from a badge registry," she said. "You did it from a desk with no clearance, no support, and no authority, and you did it 3 weeks before we did. We've been running this since June, Mr. Carter. We had a task force. We had 11 people and a budget, and we were 4 weeks out from an arrest package, and a logistics clerk beat us to it with a printer and a clipboard." Ethan said nothing. "And then you walked into a gymnasium with no weapon." "Yes." "Why?" "Because there were 31 loose rifles on that floor, and 141 kids," Ethan said. "And if I'd had a gun, I'd have gone for the gun. That's not courage, ma'am. That's not humility. I know myself. I know exactly what I am when there's a weapon in reach. So I left it in the ditch because the only way to make sure I did the right thing was to make the wrong thing physically impossible." At 11:45, the woman wrote one line on a legal pad. "They're going to want to give you things," she said. "I don't want them." "They're going to want to give them anyway. The Navy has an institutional need to attach a medal to this, because a medal is a story with an ending, and right now what they have is 141 children who almost died on a base that ignored a warning for 5 months. She closed the laptop. You're going to be asked to accept a Navy Cross, possibly in person, possibly on television. No. Mr. Carter. Ma'am, with respect. If you put me on television, then a man in Virginia who spent 4 seconds deciding whether to tell Bryce Hale who I was gets to see my face, my rank, my base, and the town my daughter goes to school in. Ethan leaned forward. And then he doesn't need a database query anymore, does he? At 11:46, the woman put down her pen. No, she said. He doesn't. So no. So no, she agreed. At 11:47, she said, there's one more thing and I'm going to say it once, and then I'm going to leave you alone. Okay? The file. Yours. It's open now. It's been open since 07/03, and there's no putting it back, because a system that has read something cannot unread it. She said it gently. You know that. You knew it when you called your friend last night. I knew it. Then you know what I'm about to offer. Yes. You can come back, she said. Not to a base, not to a uniform. You'd be a name on a list of 4 people. And Mr. Carter, I want to be honest with you in a way that my job usually doesn't permit. We do not have anybody who can do what you did in that gymnasium. We have men who can shoot. We have a great many men who can shoot. We do not have a single person who can stand under a basketball hoop with a rifle on his forehead and talk a professional into putting it down in 9 minutes. And at 11:49, Ethan Carter said, What time does it start? What? The job. If I say yes, what time does it start? She looked at him. Because there's a thing at 7 o'clock, he said. At 11:50, the woman with the reading glasses laughed out loud once, and it surprised her. Go to the thing, she said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get from me today, she said. And Mr. Carter, that was the interview, that question. That was the whole interview, and you passed it in about 6 words. At 12:30, Ethan Carter walked out of a building, and Chief Bergstrom was standing in the parking lot. Just standing there, in the sun, waiting. Chief? Carter. Bergstrom's jaw was working. I've been out here 2 hours. Why? Because they went in that building with you, and they didn't come out, and I didn't know if you were coming out. He wiped his face with his hand. You told me to lie to Ops. Then Ops got arrested, so I figured I'd stand here. Chief. 18 months, Bergstrom said. You sat at that desk 18 months and I called you the quiet guy. I introduced you to people as the quiet guy, like it was your name. It's not a bad name. Don't do that. Bergstrom's voice cracked. Don't be gracious at me, Carter. I don't want gracious. I asked you about a badge 3 weeks ago, and I forgot it in 10 minutes because it was a Tuesday. There's 141 kids in that school, and I forgot it in 10 minutes. At 12:31, Ethan Carter did something he had not done in 9 years. He put his hand on a man's shoulder. Chief, listen to me very carefully because I'm only going to say this once, and then we're never talking about it again. He waited until Bergstrom looked at him. You didn't forget it. You asked me if I needed anything, and I said no. I said no, Chief. I sat 11 feet from you for 18 months, and I never once told you the truth about anything because that was the deal I made, and I made it, and you didn't. That's not, you want to carry something, carry this instead. Ethan's hand tightened. The next quiet guy who sits at that desk and asks you a weird question about a badge, you write it down. That's it. That's the whole penance. You write it down. At 12:32, Bergstrom said, I can do that. I know you can. At 1400, the Commodore's aircraft landed, and by 1500 there were 40 people on Naval Station Belhurst who had flown in from 4 states, and by 1600 the word had gone through every barracks and every shop and every hangar on that installation, and it did not go through as a report. It went through the way it always goes. You hear about the guy from logistics. At 1610, Rivera sat on a crate in Hangar 6 with his hands still shaking and 11 guys around him. Say it again. I already said it 4 times. Say it again, Tony. He stood up, Rivera said, in the middle of the road. Truck's doing 20, and he's got a clipboard. And he puts his hand up like a crossing guard, like he's stopping a mom in a minivan, and the truck's 40 meters out, and he doesn't move, and Voss is screaming, and he doesn't move. And the truck's in a ditch. Rivera looked up. He never touched it. He never touched anything. He filed a work order in March about a broken grate, and nobody fixed it. And 11 weeks later he used it to stop a truck. Doheny from the back said, "That's not real." I was there. Tony, that's not real, man. I know, Rivera said. I know it's not. At 16:15, Voss walked in and the hangar went quiet. He stood there in his kit with dirt on him and a face that nobody in that det had ever seen on him, and he said the thing that ended the 6 months of it once and never took it back. Anybody in this hangar makes a single joke about a single dad again, Voss said, and you're going to have a problem with me, not a paperwork problem. Nobody said anything. Say okay. Okay. Say okay. They said it. At 16:17, Doheny said quietly, Voss, is it true he's some kind of... Don't. Voss said it fast. Don't finish that. I'm just... Doheny. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to be telling people for the rest of my life, and it's the truth, and I want you to hear it, and I want you to stop. Voss's voice was flat. He's a logistics specialist. He's got a kid. He noticed something and nobody listened to him. That's the whole story. That's all of it. That's the only part that matters, and it's the only part I'll ever say. At 16:18, somebody in the back said, that's not the whole story, and Voss said, it's the only one he wanted. At 16:50, Ethan Carter got a phone call. Ethan? Ray. They told me you turned down the name. Yeah. You know how many people have ever... 0, she mentioned. Ray laughed. It went on for a while. It got a little wet at the end. 9 years, Ray said. 9 years I sat in a hole waiting for that phone to ring and telling myself if it ever did, it'd be because you were dead. And instead, you call me about a badge registry. Sorry to disappoint. Ethan. Ray stopped. Sarah would have... Don't. No, you're going to hear it. Ray's voice went thick. I made a promise in that parking lot too, and mine was, I'd keep you out. And I broke it at 0500 this morning, and I've been sick about it all day, and then somebody sent me the gym report at noon. A breath. 141 kids, no rounds fired inside. He talked him down. He talked him down, Ethan. Yeah. You know what she'd say? Yeah. Say it then. She'd say, I didn't break the promise, Ethan said, and his voice finally went right there, sitting in his car in a parking lot at 16:52 on a Friday. She'd say the promise was never don't be him. She'd say the promise was don't be him for the wrong reasons. That's exactly what she'd say. I know. And Ethan, Ray's voice steadied, you went in that gym with a clipboard. Yeah. That's not the guy I trained, Ray said. That's the guy she made. But at 16:53, Ethan Carter sat in a car with a purple lunchbox on the passenger seat and cried for about 90 seconds, and then he stopped, because it was 16:53, and he had 2 hours and 7 minutes, and he had a shirt to iron. At 1855, he walked into the multi-purpose room of Wilson Elementary School in a plaid button-down and jeans. Not a uniform. Not a single thing on him that said anything about anything. And there were 300 people in that room, parents and grandparents and kids on a Friday night that should have been canceled, that everybody had assumed would be canceled, and that Mrs. Delgado had refused to cancel because Mrs. Delgado had stood in front of 30 children that morning with her arms out and had decided somewhere around 0840 that these kids were going to get their night. At 1856, the room noticed him. Not all at once, in a wave. A woman turned, and then her husband, and then the row in front of them, and it went across 300 people in about 11 seconds, and the room went quiet. Ethan stopped. He hadn't planned for this. He had planned for a truck, a fire, a gymnasium, a rifle, a lieutenant commander, and a woman with reading glasses. He had not planned for a room full of parents. At 1857, a man Ethan had never met stood up, and he was maybe 40. He had a kid on his hip, and he didn't say anything, and he didn't clap, and he just stood there. Then his wife stood up. Then the row behind them. Then 300 people in a multi-purpose room stood up on a Friday night, and nobody said one single word, and Ethan Carter, who had been shot at that morning and had refused a Navy Cross that afternoon, stood in a doorway in a plaid shirt and did not know what to do with his hands. Somebody's grandmother started clapping. And then it broke. At 1858, it was the loudest thing that had ever happened in that building. At 1859, Ethan Carter did the only thing he could think of. He pointed at the second row. At the aisle seat, which was empty, which had a piece of notebook paper taped to it, and on the paper in 9-year-old handwriting in purple marker, it said, "Dad." And 300 people watched him walk down the aisle and sit down in it. At 19:01, Maya came out with her group, and she found him instantly first row of her eyes, second row of the seats, and her whole face did something that Ethan would keep for the rest of his life, and would take with him wherever he was going, and she was not embarrassed at all, not one bit. She pointed right at him in front of the entire school and mouthed, "You came." He mouthed back, "Told you." At 19:04, she did her reading. It was 90 seconds long. It was about a fire truck. She got one word wrong and fixed it herself and kept going, and Ethan Carter, who had that morning identified a 5-month infiltration operation from a badge registry, thought it was the finest piece of public speaking he had ever heard in his life. At 19:06, she sat down and it was over, and he clapped so hard his hands hurt. At 19:40, they walked out to the car. "Dad?" "Yeah." Everybody stood up. "Yeah." "Why?" At 19:41, Ethan Carter stopped in a parking lot and crouched down so he was at eye level with his daughter. "Because this morning a bunch of grown-ups made a mistake," he said. "A big one, and a bunch of other grown-ups fixed it. And they're all going to argue about who did what for about 2 years. But they were looking at you." "I know. So did you do it?" And Ethan said, "I noticed something." Maya looked at him for a long time. 9 years old. Her mother's face. Her mother's way of ending a conversation. "That's not the whole thing," she said. "No. Are you going to tell me?" At 1942, Ethan Carter said, "Someday. When you're older." "That's what people say when it's never." "It's not never," he said. "I promise it's not never. But right now you're 9, and I want you to be 9, and the deal I made with your mom was that you'd get to be 9. That's the whole deal, kid. That's all it ever was." He tucked her hair back. "So someday. And I don't lie to you." "You edit." "I edit," he agreed. "But I don't lie." At 1943, Maya Carter said, "Okay." "Yes, sir." And that was that because she was her mother's daughter, And when she was done with the subject, it was tried and convicted, and there was no appeal. At 1944, she got in the car and said, "Can we get ice cream? It's almost 8. Dad. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Yeah, we can get ice cream." At 21:10, she was asleep, and he was standing in the doorway of her room, and his phone buzzed. A number that didn't exist. Monday, 600. Gray car, school lot. 2 days a month. That's the offer. You keep the desk, you keep the town, you keep the school. Nobody ever knows. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he typed, 2 days a month. 2 days. And the other 28. 3 seconds. The other 28, you're the clerk. At 21:12, Ethan Carter wrote back one word. Deal. At 21:13, the phone buzzed one last time. Ethan, for what it's worth. In 19 years I've read 4 files like yours. Yours is the only one where the man was better after. He put the phone face down on the counter. Then he went and did the dishes, because they were in the sink, because it was Friday, because there was school on Monday, and a lunch to pack, and a purple shoe somewhere in this house that he was going to have to find at 7:10. 3 months later, a board of inquiry produced a report. It was 400 pages long. It named Bryce Hale 11 times. It named Bill Kessler 9 times. It named a man in Virginia 0 times because that part went in a different report in a different building, and there were only 4 copies. And on page 91, there was a paragraph that changed the United States Navy more than any of it. It said that at 1500, on the day prior to the incident, a logistics specialist had briefed the operations officer with documentary evidence of the infiltration and had been dismissed. It didn't say his name. He'd asked for that. It just said a logistics specialist. And by that spring, every base commander in the fleet had a new standing order taped inside a folder, and it was 1 line long, and it did not come from a general or an admiral or a committee. It said, read the pages. 2 years later, Dylan Voss made chief. At his ceremony, they asked him to say a few words about leadership, and he stood up in front of 60 people, and he did not say anything he'd rehearsed. He said, "I spent 6 months making fun of a man for leaving work at 4 o'clock to pick up his kid. I thought that made him small. I thought a warrior was a guy who didn't have anything to lose because then he'd be willing to lose it." He looked out at the room. "And then I watched a man walk into a gymnasium with 141 kids in it. No weapon, no vest. And I finally understood it backwards. He wasn't brave, even though he had a daughter. He was brave because he had a daughter. That's the whole thing. That's the entire secret. And it took me 6 months of being a jackass to learn it." Somebody asked afterward who the man was. And Chief Voss said, "Logistics guy." "That's it." "That's it," Voss said. "That's all he ever wanted to be, and he earned the right to be it, and I'm not going to be the guy who takes it from him." Anthony Rivera stayed in. He made petty officer first. He's on his 4th deployment. And there is a thing he does that nobody can explain that has gotten him written up twice and commended 4 times. Which is that when a young sailor comes to him with something weird, something small, something that sounds like nothing, something that sounds like a badge on a Tuesday, Rivera stops whatever he is doing and he writes it down. Every single time. In front of them. So they can see him do it. Basho. He's never told anybody why. And on a Tuesday afternoon, in a small town 2 hours from a Navy base, a man in a plaid shirt sits in a parking lot at 1555 with the engine off and a purple lunchbox on the passenger seat, waiting for the doors of an elementary school to open. Nobody in that parking lot knows. The woman in the minivan next to him thinks he's a supply clerk. The crossing guard thinks he's the quiet dad. His daughter's teacher thinks he's the one who always shows up. She's right. That's the part everybody got wrong for 18 months, and it's the part Bryce Hale got wrong in an office at 1500 on a Friday, and it's the part a man with a rifle got wrong under a basketball hoop at 0839. They all looked at Ethan Carter and saw what he wasn't. They never once looked at what he was. He was the man who showed up. He showed up at a desk nobody cared about for 18 months and did the work right. He showed up with 3 pages and put them on a desk and got laughed at, and came back the next morning with a folder. He showed up in a road in front of a moving truck with nothing in his hands but a clipboard. He showed up in a gymnasium with no weapon because he knew himself well enough to leave it behind. He showed up in an aisle seat in the second row at 1859 on the worst day of his life in a plaid shirt on time. And that is what a warrior actually is. Not the loudest man in the hangar. Not the one with the medals or the muscles or the story. The one who notices. The one who tells the truth to people who laugh at him. The one who does the small right thing on an ordinary Tuesday when there is no glory in it and no one is watching, and it will never ever be in a report. They ignored a single dad's final warning. They will. And 141 children went home that night because that single dad showed up anyway.